Welcome to The Hub's ongoing coverage of Canada's federal election campaign. I'm Sean Spear, editor-at-large at The Hub, and I'm grateful to be joined by Andrew Coyne, a Globe and Mail columnist and leading political commentator and pundit. Andrew, thanks so much for joining me.
Good to be with you.
Andrew, there's so much to discuss in the aftermath of last night's election campaign, but I want to start with what strikes me as one of the biggest takeaways, and that is the potential secular trend towards a two-party system, at least in English Canada. Why don't you reflect on its significance for last night's result, but more broadly, what it could mean for our politics?
I'm skeptical that there is that trend. It's clearly this election, there was a huge surge. You got both major parties getting more than 40% of the vote. That has not happened since 1930.
Yes.
So that is an extraordinary thing. But before this time, the trend has been the other direction, and we shall see. But I would not be at all surprised to see the trend revert. The staying power of party brands, party identities, I think has been proven over the years. There have been times when the Liberals looked like they were dead only a few years ago, and suddenly they're back in power. There's been times when the Conservatives, I remember there was only one Conservative government, provincial government in the country, and what did that mean? Well, now there's whatever it is, 7. And now we're talking about the NDP as having, well, the NDP looked like they were dead in the early 90s. Doesn't mean the things can change. Maybe we're into a new secular trend. But I just think there were such extraordinary circumstances in this election where the emergence of this existential threat from Trump just really drove everything else, at least for the first part of the campaign, off the map, and people sort of picked up sides, who can best defend us, or whether, I think also it was, is this the main issue, or am I still too mad at the government that I want them to go?
Yes.
And it just drove everything. It collapsed all the small party votes in ways that I'm not sure are a secular trend more than just a one-off, but we shall see.
Yes, indeed. One thing, though, that struck me about the campaign, one way to think about it, it seems to me, is that Pierre Poilievre successfully consolidated the Canadian right.
Yeah.
Mark Carney successfully consolidated the Canadian left.
That's right.
And the problem for the Conservatives is just more of them than there is of the Conservatives. And that's in a world, of course, where Pierre Poilievre pushed the party's support up to levels that it hadn't reached in a long, long time. And so it seems to me one of the big questions for Conservatives, without knowing, as you say, what to make of the future of the NDP and the potential for vote splits, is how can the Conservatives push that number up even further such that they aren't relying on the NDP to get them into power, that is, that they are able to control their own political destiny?
Well, I think you can phrase that from the other direction. Did he push up that Conservative vote at the expense of driving the NDP vote down? And I don't mean in the good way of, you attracted working class voters. I mean in the sense of, did you so scare your Democratic voters that they fled into the Liberal camp to try to stop you? So you can, it's one of those be careful what you wish for things. I think it matters how you build your vote. If you do so in a way that is ginning up your base, getting up turnout, but at the cost of frightening people who aren't already in your camp and frightening them in a way that they don't stay home, they go and vote for somebody else to stop you, then I think you have to think about whether the game is worth the candle. We sometimes talk about political leaders as having been lucky. They were lucky that the vote was split of the other parties.
Yes.
Oftentimes it's not luck, it's the choices they made. Exhibit A would be Jean Chrétien. People say, well, he just got lucky, he had the Conservative and Reform parties were split. He helped make them split. Why? Because he balanced the budget, and he took away one of those glues in the Conservative coalition, which is we have to hang together because the Liberals are going to bankrupt the country.
Yes.
When he did that, he helped to drive a wedge in between those two parties. So I think that's something Conservatives really have to think about is, people will flip it around. People said, oh, Poilievre was just unlucky that the NDP vote collapsed. I think he's got to wear part of that. You can imagine, I've said this before, but you can imagine in a Trumpian crisis like that people, if with a different Conservative leader, people might have said, let's vote for him. He's a reassuring, authoritative, unifying force, whatever that leader would be. But nobody said that about Poilievre. And so I think he's got to think about that.
It's a thoughtful and important point. I take it, Andrew, but I think if Pierre Poilievre was here or someone representing Pierre Poilievre, he would say, had he followed the implicit insight the risk is he would have bled support on his right flank. That is to say, there is almost like a one-for-one trade-off.
It's a trade-off.
And so how should the party think about that trade-off in a world in which they've pushed their ceiling up higher than some of us thought was possible, and it still wasn't enough?
It's absolutely a trade-off. I think one way to look at it is to say he drove the People's Party, or something drove them, he contributed to it, into the dirt. I mean, they got less than 1% of the vote here.
Yes.
I think he's got some room now, if he has the wit to take it, to pivot a bit and to try to be a bit more statesmanlike and a bit more approachable, and all these things that people have been urging him to do. He's made his point about, if you're mad about certain issues, I get it. I'm listening to you.
Yes.
I think he needs now to look more prime ministerial. I think he made there was a kind of a double-edged sword on election night. His speech was very statesmanlike. It said all the right things. It was tonally very good.
You lauded it last night on the broadcast.
I thought he spoke particularly well. The same night, Jamil Javani spent 20 minutes just tearing a strip up and down off of Doug Ford, the Conservative Ontario Premier.
Conservative.
I don't. Well, okay, that's part of the problem. Okay, he's a big C conservative.
Yes.
He may or may not be appealing in terms of the particular policies. I've got my differences with him, but he's got a pretty large constituency within the party.
Yes.
And I don't think Jamil Javani, I may be wrong, but I don't think that was spontaneous or unauthorized.
Yes.
I just don't think that's the way the Poilievre people play. And I saw a lot of people online deciding that the thing we need to do tonight is engage in tribal warfare with our own tribe, or at least people within the same conservative tent. Ultimately, I'm not sure that's a particularly productive thing to have a lot of bloodletting of people. I think that hurt the party, frankly, because it's not just Poilievre versus Ford. It's Poilievre versus Houston. It's all these candidates who were ready and willing to run for the Conservatives, like Mike de Jong in BC, absolutely sterling first-rate candidates who weren't in the Poilievre clique or mold and weren't allowed to run. That's crazy.
Yeah. Just in parentheses, on the subject of the Ford-Poilievre dynamic, we're going to have analysis in the coming days on the Ford-Carney switchers. Who are these Conservative voters that the federal party wasn't able to pick up in the province of Ontario? And what explains that?
Yeah.
I'll let you go in a minute, but you mentioned the subject of being prime ministerial. One thing that Jason Kenney said on the broadcast, the CBC broadcast with you last night, is that Pierre Poilievre seemed to be auditioning for the role of opposition leader, and that's ultimately how Canadians came to see him. Is there counterintuitively value in not having won a seat? That is to say, he isn't going to necessarily be in the House of Commons right away, which is inherently adversarial. Is there a chance for him to get out of that context and engage with Canadians in a way that causes them to think differently about him and may in fact start to see him as a prospective prime minister?
Maybe. Again, speaking of sort of, you can look at these things different ways. It's always difficult for an opposition leader to get any press attention.
Yes.
And it'll be particularly difficult if you're not in Parliament. And if we're indeed into the white waters of dealing with Trump, Mr. Carney is going to be everywhere, seen to be making executive decisions and being prime minister.
Yes.
And so I think the danger is that Poilievre kind of gets left behind and forgotten in the midst of all this. So, on balance, I would say I'm a parliamentary fan. I think the place to prosecute your case is in the People's House. I think he would be better advised to get in there as soon as he can. Now he's got a tricky problem there. He's got to find somebody to give up their seat for him.
Yes.
And I think he's got a lot of fence mending to do within the party before then. It's fine on election night to say, I'm staying here and we're going to complete the task, and nobody wants to challenge him on the night. I am not of the view that he's out of the woods. I think there's going to be a demand for a reckoning, whether or not it involves people demanding he step down. I think there's going to be a lot of people saying there has to be accountability for the way this campaign was run, for the mistakes that were made during the campaign, the inability to pivot and deal with the very changed landscape from Donald Trump, the strange focus on the leader when the leader was clearly a liability. Very late in the game they started to get traction, but it took them about 4 different slogans, and I think there'll be a lot of questions asked. And just generally speaking, it's fine to say, oh, we got 42% of the vote. We did better than people expected, but that's what you say when you lost an election.
Yes.
And a lot of conservatives, I would think, were saying, we had this thing in the bag. Why didn't we win? Why did we scare these people so silly that they all fled to the Liberals? Why weren't we able to take advantage of the situation? All those kinds of questions, I think, deserve to be asked. I will say, if I were betting, I think probably Poilievre survives because the base levels, et cetera. I'm not sure Jenny Byrne is long for this world politically.
As we wrap up, you called yourself a man of parliament. Why don't you just share with our viewers some details about your forthcoming book? By this time, roughly next week, they'll be able to find it on bookshelves and on Amazon and everywhere else.
Yes,
they find books.
It has the title, The Crisis of Canadian Democracy, and I mean it because I think we are, you can see it on election night. We do a lot of things well. The paper ballots, the voting process is untamperable. We accept the peaceful transition of power. Nobody seeks vengeance when they win, et cetera. So there's a lot of things in our political culture that are relatively healthy at a time when it's breaking down in a lot of other countries, and we should be very glad and happy about that. But institutionally, in terms of the mechanisms, we do a lot. We go through the form of a democratic government without actually really living up to it substantively. And when you add up the complete lack of accountability mechanisms, the weakness of Parliament versus any government, this isn't to pick on any party, but versus any government, the weakness of members of Parliament versus the leaders of their parties, again, not to pick on any because it's all the parties, the degree to which members of Parliament are basically they're just stand up and sit down when they're told. The enormous distortions in our electoral system, which we saw on display last night. The Liberals did historically well in Alberta. They got 30% of the vote, or near to it in Alberta. They haven't done that since 1968. They still got 2 seats. And so at a time when...
I think a net loss, right?
That's right. And so at a time when certain characters would like to stir up separatist sentiment in Alberta, they get this kind of bogus ratification of, they only got 2 seats. Well, no, a third of Albertans would like to vote for the Liberals. Again, this isn't to be in praise of Liberals. It just means the distortions and the divisions within our country are not nearly as severe as our electoral system makes them, and that's non-trivial. It exacerbates and makes worse these existing divisions in ways that really hurt the country. So I think the purpose of the book is to look at each of these issues which people have dealt with. There's whole books written about each of them. But when you draw it all together, I think it paints a very disturbing portrait of just how real our democracy is. We go through the motions. We have this kind of ceremonial parliament. But how real is parliamentary democracy in this country, I think, is a really legitimate question to ask.
Great. We'll have to have you back on the program soon to talk more about the book. Andrew Coyne, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Take care.